Fiery but mostly peaceful. Such were the protests against the Stamp Act on the menu in Boston late the summer of 1765. The legislatures and newspapers of the colonies had written their petitions and editorials, but, up to this point, no direct action had been taken. In Boston, however, a clandestine group known as the Loyal Nine were plotting ways to resist the Stamp Act by force. As a precursor to the Sons of Liberty, not much is known about the Loyal Nine, as their operations were shrouded in secrecy. Its membership was comprised mostly of middle-class businessmen, including distillers, jewelers, and braziers. They needed someone who could raise and handle a mob, and so they recruited a shoemaker, Ebenezer McIntosh, for this purpose. 18th century Boston was no stranger to mob violence. The city was then split into a north and south end, the point of demarcation being the mill pond. Every year, two gangs from the north and south end would pummel each other for Pope's Day. Held on November the 5th, Pope's Day evolved out of the English observation of Guy Fawkes' Day, the anniversary of the failed gunpowder plot to assassinate James I and his Parliament in 1605. Pope's Day had been observed in New England since 1623 and had since taken on a local flavor. Because New England had been settled by staunchly Protestant Puritans, the event was used as an expression of anti-papal sentiment. Each of the two gangs from the north and south end of Boston made their own effigies of the Pope and paraded them on carts. Just a year before, in 1764, the North and South Enders had met at the Mill Bridge where a battle broke out, each side vying for the other's papal effigy. The South End gang prevailed and made their way to Boston Neck, where the Pope was burned. The cobbler, Ebenezer McIntosh, was their leader. Accordingly, when the Loyal Nine recruited him, McIntosh had no difficulty in raising a mob for the Stamp Act riots on the 14th of August. Their first target was Andrew Oliver, a merchant and local politician selected to be the distributor of stamps in Massachusetts. Oliver was the brother-in-law of Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson, and it was rumored among the Bostonians that Hutchinson was a supporter of the law. On the morning of August the 14th, an effigy of Oliver was found hanging from the Liberty Tree in Boston Common. Beside it was a large boot, meant to evoke the image of the Earl of Bute. Bute was no longer the PM, but his title had become a metonym for distasteful parliamentary policy. A devil could be seen emerging from the boot and holding a copy of the Stamp Act. Lieutenant Governor Hutchinson ordered the sheriff to take down the effigy, but he refused to do so, stating that he and his officers would be killed in the attempt. In the evening a mob, supposedly totaling several thousand, proceeded to the town house where the governor and council were in session. As they marched, the mob shouted, "Liberty and property," and "Down with the stamps." It then proceeded to a dock owned by Andrew Oliver on Kilby Street. Insinuating that Oliver's building would be used as a stamp office, they razed it to the ground in just a few minutes, and then proceeded to his house. Standing outside the residence, they beheaded the effigy of Oliver while throwing stones through the windows. They then headed to Fort Hill, a short distance away, where they burned Oliver's image in a bonfire using the wood that they had taken from his erstwhile dock building. The mob then returned to Oliver's house, the family by this point having fled to the home of a friendly neighbor. Finding the doors barricaded, the mob beat them down and threatened to kill Oliver. Being told by someone that he had fled to Castle William in the harbor, the mob contented itself with destroying the furniture and wainscoting. In the midst of the pillaging, Lieutenant Governor Hutchinson showed up with the sheriff and attempted to disperse the mob. The two were recognized and pelted with stones as they fled. The festivities continued until midnight, when McIntosh dispersed the crowd. The following day, Andrew Oliver met with a few gentlemen of the town who advised him to resign his commission as distributor of stamps. As might be expected, Oliver promised to do so, just as soon as he actually had a commission to resign, since his had not yet arrived from England. There was peace for a short time, but 11 days later, the mob was at it again, this time with new targets. Charles Paxton, Marshal of the Vice Admiralty Court, William Story, Deputy Registrar of the Vice Admiralty Court, Benjamin Hallowell, Controller of Customs, and last of all, Lieutenant Governor Hutchinson. His attempt to cut down the effigy of Oliver and to prevent the pillaging of his house had put Hutchinson in the crosshairs of the mob. According to Hutchinson himself, a sermon had been preached the day before by Dr. Jonathan Mayhew at the West Meeting House, which stirred the mob up again. Mayhew was noted for his opposition to the stamp duty, and his sermon that day came from the 5th chapter of Galatians, in which Paul, the author, contrasts the supposed slavery of the law with the liberty that his hearers had been called to. The 12th verse of the chapter read, "I would have it that they were even cut off which trouble you." Although Mayhew would disclaim that his sermon was responsible for the riot, Hutchinson claimed that one of the agitators, likely Mackintosh, would confess that he had been excited by the sermon and thought that he was doing God service by rioting the next day. In any case, the evening of August the 26th inaugurated a new round of violence. To wreak havoc more efficiently, the mob split up into two groups. The first went to the residence of Charles Paxton, who, the owner informed them, was only a renter. He then offered them a barrel of punch at a nearby tavern. Having refreshed themselves, they proceeded on to William Story's house. Here were stored the records of the Vice Admiralty courts, which were then brought outside and burned. Meanwhile, the other group made their way to Benjamin Hallowell's house, one of the most beautiful in the town. After dishing out the usual treatment, both portions of the mob reunited for the coup de grace. Now making their way to the lieutenant governor's house, they let loose with an unprecedented fury. To quote historian Robert Middelkauf, "The mob took its time on his house. Virtually everything movable within was destroyed or stolen. Papers, plate, furniture, clothing, and 900 pounds sterling, and what could not be moved, walls, partitions, and roof, were severely battered. The handsome cupola was cut off, a demolition that took 3 hours, and much of the slate roof was pulled down. Daybreak found the mob still hard at work. A part of the roof still survived, and several brick walls still stood. Dawn finally discouraged the mob, who evidently had been determined to level the house to its foundations. Thinking that things may have gotten a little out of hand, the town held a meeting and disapproved of the violence, and the militia was called out to patrol the streets for a number of weeks. Mackintosh was arrested for his instigation of the riot. The other conspirators, worrying that Mackintosh might start naming them, threatened that unless he were released, the customs house would be torn down too. The customs officials then convinced the sheriff to let him go, and no one was ever prosecuted for either of the two riots. In point of fact, the rioters had been tremendously successful. The Stamp Act was due to be enforced on November the 1st, and when it finally arrived, the administration was in disarray about how to proceed. Each official punted the ball to someone else. The governor, the surveyor general, the customs officials, the stamp distributor, and the attorney general all attempted to avoid the issue. Just a few months later, in March, the Stamp Act would be repealed, never to be enforced in Massachusetts. However, just because the Parliament relented on the Stamp Act, it did not intend to limit its powers of taxation. The very same day it repealed the Stamp Act, it passed the Declaratory Act, which asserted Parliament's power to make laws binding the colonies in all cases whatsoever. It was clear that neither side was going to give in. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and support me on Patreon. Thanks.